Today I'm on the road in my car and I have a new story to you. Take a seat, buckle up, and let's begin. I, Connor, was planning to move to a new city where my beloved cousin Jeremy lives and to find out everything I went there for a long weekend. I originally planned to stay with Jeremy, but then his wife's whole family decided that they wanted to come to him at the same time. So they put me up at the Hilton Hotel. There's nothing wrong with that. One of the few problems I don't experience in my life is money. My main problem is the lack of decent female company. I seem to be attracted to the wrong women at all, and this usually leads to either anger, disappointment, misunderstanding, or a broken heart. Since Jeremy doesn't like to spend too much time with his wife's family, he and I had fun while I was looking for a place to live and set up my law practice. My practice is such that I rarely have to meet clients in person, so I can live and work anywhere where I am a member of the State Bar Association. On Saturday evening, Jeremy and I went to a party hosted by one of his business partners, Tom Baring. The party is typical for people under the age of 30, except that there is a large dance floor in the basement, which is often used. There were a few unmarried ladies there, and I'm a good dancer and I like dancing. So I was pretty busy. However, there was one inconvenience. Tom's wife, Susan, looked like a cross between a maid and a quiet one. She didn't seem to have anything to talk about with anyone, and mostly she was doing what made sure all the snacks and drinks were available. Besides, Tom seems to be behaving frankly badly with her, so I immediately disliked him. I noticed Susan first of all because she was wearing a beautiful dress. Not fashionable, but just beautiful, while most of the other women were wearing jeans or shorts. Susan's face couldn't have started a Trojan War, and her clothed body wouldn't have inspired Michelangelo or Da Vinci to create sculptures, but she was more than a decent-looking woman. Somehow the old phrase came to mind of its own accord. I wouldn't kick her out of bed, confusing me because I didn't like to think that way about women, especially married once. Eventually, when there was a short break in my dance routine, I noticed Susan heading to the kitchen for snacks. I was introduced to her when we arrived on the set, and she uttered the only word I heard from her all evening. Hello, I followed her into the kitchen and said, "Try not to scare her off." "Susan, it looks like you're working too hard and not having fun. Can I help you with something?" In case you haven't remembered from our brief acquaintance, my name is Connor. She looked not just into my eyes, but it seems into my very soul, and her eyes were so dark that they seemed almost black before answering. "Thanks." When she began to wash the glasses in the sink, asking, Won't you wipe it off?" I took a dish towel and started wiping. I tried to start a conversation with her, but even though she answered questions, the answers were terse, not unfriendly, just very brief. And her reaction to statements was usually only a nod or a smile, words rarely. After we washed all the glasses, I helped her put some more snacks on the plates and then took half of the plates and glasses to the dance floor and to the bar. A little later, I asked her to dance. She reluctantly agreed. "Tom doesn't like me dancing," was probably the longest sentence she had uttered that evening. Too bad. I chuckled and led her to the dance floor. She was a sports dancer and seemed to enjoy it. But at the beginning of our second dance, Tom came up to her and more or less loudly ordered her to bring him something. She shrugged and left. I was furious, and if he hadn't been the host and one of Jeremy's colleagues, I would have intervened. After a while, I found Susan alone in the kitchen again. I turned her towards me and asked, "Why do you let Tom treat you like that? You seem to be a wonderful woman who has everything right in her head. You shouldn't let him treat you rudely." She smiled and simply replied, "It's complicated. Could you help me some more?" I readily completed another task for her, after which she turned directly to me. "Where are you staying?" "What is it?" she asked, starting a conversation for the first time. Not only with me, but with everyone I was watching. At the Hilton on Grand Street. "How did you know I was here just visiting?" "From the way Jeremy introduced you," she smiled, then shocked him with another question. "Does your room have a view of the lake?" "Yes, it's a beautiful view. So your room is even, and on which floor?" "Number 810. "You must be familiar with the Hilton," I replied with a smile. You smiled back and then went off to do some other things. When Jeremy and I were leaving, I decided to say goodbye to Susan. By that time, Tom was drunk and would hardly have remembered what I was saying to him. So instead of thanking him, I just mumbled, "Do you're an asshole?" I think Susan heard that. At least, I think that's what caused her to grin. Jeremy and I went to a local hangout, played billiards, and then I went to my hotel. I took a shower, was in my underwear, and was about to go to bed when there was a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole, but all I saw was a woman's hair. I opened the door a crack and was shocked to see Susan. She was wearing a raincoat. Susan didn't say anything when I asked, "Hi, Susan. Why are you here?" Instead, she opened her raincoat, revealing a very beautiful naked body, much more beautiful than in clothes. And when the shock passed, she took the opportunity to just walk past me. I struggled to remember if Susan had said anything the night before during our debauchery. I couldn't remember her saying a single word. But if her actions had been words, they would have filled a book the size of Tolstoy's. War and Peace. The next day, I was practically in a trance. Jeremy and I looked at several houses and offices together, but I was not up to it. He probably asked me half a dozen times, "What's the matter with you, Connor?" I was excusing myself by saying that I had a hangover, despite the fact that I had probably only drunk 2 beers the night before. However, I actually had a hangover. Driving home on Monday morning, all I could think about was my meeting with Silent Susan. Although I've dated at least a dozen women who looked better than her, making love to her was an order of magnitude better than any other I've ever had. I should be lamenting and feeling guilty for making love to a married woman, which I had never done before and intellectually and morally despised. Instead, all I felt was excitement. For the next month getting ready to move, I was like a fucker. I thought about Susan all the time, except when I was working or training hard. After moving, it took a whole month before I took my head out of my ass and started looking for a female company in a new city. He made it a rule never to enter Susan's house or try to contact her. After about 3 months, I really liked my new city. I earned even better than before. The surroundings were invigorating, and I made several friends, both men and women. I've had a few dates, but nothing that could get me involved. Almost exactly 3 months after I moved into my new home, I went to Jeremy's party without a partner and was having a pretty good time when Tom and Susan walked in the door. When I saw Susan, my thoughts immediately returned to the heavenly experience in room 810 of the local Hilton Hotel. She looked exactly the same as at the last party, although the dress was a different color and the hairstyle was more refined. I waited until Tom had drunk a couple of glasses of strong alcohol, and when Susan was alone, away from Jeremy's little dance floor before approaching her. "Hi, Susan." I smiled. "Hi, Connor," she replied with a smile. "Do you want to dance?" I asked, holding out my hand. She silently nodded in agreement, grinned, and took my hand. We really danced like crazy. Susan was less stiff than at the party because she didn't have to worry about getting enough snacks and booze, and she turned out to be an even more athletic dancer than I remembered. After about 45 minutes of vigorous dancing when we were both sweating profusely, I said, "Let's take a break. What would you like to drink?" "Soda," she replied. She stayed in her seat until I brought her a drink, which made me smile broadly. Has Tom ever brought you a drink? I asked, sipping my beer. I'm the one bringing the drinks to Tom, she replied. After some more communication, during which she gave her typical terse answers to questions and mostly answered statements with gestures, I grinned. Noticing? You don't say much, do you? She smiled broadly. Some men wish there wasn't a chatty woman around. I believe in deeds, not words. We danced a little more, and I took her with me so that she could chat with different people. At the party, she seemed glad to be included in the group chat, although she still didn't say much. When the party started to die down, she took her leave and went to look for Tom. I was about to leave when she came up to me and asked, "Could you help me with Tom?" He's passed out. Of course, I smiled. I found Tom passed out on the rocking couch on Jeremy's porch. Since it didn't matter before, I didn't mention my size. But I'm big enough and fit enough to easily lift about 82 kilograms on his shoulder in the style of a firefighter, walk to his car, and put him in the back seat. Susan was as verbose as I had ever heard her and asked, "Could you take him to our house and follow me?" "No problem," I smiled. Getting Tom dead drunk out of the back seat was harder than lifting him out of the rocking chair at Jeremy's house. But I managed it anyway. "Where do you want me to take it?" I asked Susan, "Please go to the master bedroom on the second floor." She said, opening the doors for me on the way. As soon as I put him on the bed, she and I left the bedroom and closed the door. And then she attacked me like a bitch in heat. After about 2 minutes of hot kisses, she said, "Shower." I guess the word shower was the only real word she said for the next hour and a half, even though she made a lot of noises, especially when I was satisfying her in the shower. In the end, we broke away from each other and lay down next to each other, playing kisses. After a delightful period of joyous stupor, she said sometimes, after 2 hours of black, "Ouch, Tom wakes up. You should probably go." That was the most I've heard from her since I met her. After I got dressed and we kissed goodbye, she said, "If you want me to stay at your house on Wednesday evening, give me your address." Once this time the intimacy was, it's almost impossible to believe. Even better than the first time, I replied, 902 Chardonnay Court. After another quick kiss, I walked out the door. I wasn't completely sure that Susan would show up at my house on Wednesday, but to make a good impression, I had a professional cleaning at home on Tuesday and made new bed linen. When I pulled up to my house around 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, Susan was standing on the porch with a big smile on her face. When I approached her, she gave me a short but hot kiss. I thought I'd order something Chinese with delivery. After dessert, she chuckled. Susan insisted on paying for the food to the courier, and I brought the soft drinks. She confirmed my suspicions that she does not drink alcohol. "I don't want to get wild," was her excuse. I laughed to myself, and in your opinion, is it if not unbridled to come to my hotel room and bring me to your house, having a husband in the next room to sleep with? For dinner, I suggested that she watch a movie on Netflix so that the food would have time to digest. Although, as usual, she didn't say anything in response to this, but she was clearly pleased, being very affectionate when we hugged while watching the movie. When the movie ended, she gave me another of her trademark passionate kisses and quickly undressed. When I woke up, Susan wasn't around, but her clothes and small suitcase were still in my room, so I assumed she was here. Besides, the smell of cooking bacon turned me on. When I entered the kitchen, bacon was frying on the stove. Susan looked up from the notebook she was writing on and smiled. "I can make an omelet," she said, lifting her naked body and giving me another kiss. "I'll help," I smiled and kissed her again. Naked, we made a cheese omelet together. I asked her harmless questions, which she usually answered succinctly, until I asked, "What are you writing in your notebook?" Just doing some entropy calculations to modify the advanced BWXT nuclear reactor I'm working on, she replied while deftly flipping our omelet using just her wrist. But what's that? I laughed. She repeated her words. After the second time, I was no less puzzled. But why would you do that? Is this the one? I asked as she used a spatula to transfer the omelet from the pan to 2 plates. It's part of my job. I'm a nuclear engineer, she replied bluntly. At first I thought she was joking, but since I had no idea what enthalpy was, I studied economics in college and assumed that it was a term from physics that I might have heard in school, but I didn't remember exactly. Or what the advanced nuclear reactor BWXT was. I didn't laugh. Instead, he asked, well, where did you study? While eating a few strips of bacon and half an omelet, she began to talk, rather than just answer questions or respond to statements. By the time we both finished, I realized she was a damn genius. Although she is only 27 years old, she received her doctorate in nuclear science and engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and has been working in this field for 6 years. In fact, as soon as she started talking about her job, I think she didn't stop for 20 minutes. While we finished breakfast, washed the bacon and omelet pans, and put the plates and dishes in the dishwasher. Finally, she finished. That's what I do in short. Of course, I understood about 1/10 of what she was saying, but it was clear that she was a damn genius. Kissing her in the kitchen, I asked rhetorically, so you're a fucking genius? Actually, with your help, I'm becoming a genius at intimacy, she grinned back, and then insisted on another kiss before we both left for work. For the next 4 months, I usually met with Susan twice a week for intimacy. She was always mostly silent, unless we somehow moved on to the topics of nuclear fission or thermonuclear fusion, which I read about so as not to look completely ignorant, in her field. And here she turned into a chatterbox. Susan pulverized me twice a week, and I remained a happy caballero, so I didn't have many other dates. During one of the sleepovers at my house, when Tom was out of town, I looked at her, sleeping after another amazing contact, and noticed bruises on some parts of her body, and wondered if Tom had beaten her. I had some suspicions because when I asked her about Tom's physical effects on her in the past, she never gave a clear answer. I suddenly admitted to myself that I had feelings for her, and although each time I hated her husband more and more for the way he treated her, and in general for what an asshole he was, I also came to the conclusion that I was an asshole myself, satisfying a married woman. I didn't get much sleep on Monday night and Tuesday morning, mostly staring at the ceiling, clutching Susan to me. Although, of course, we were supposed to have heavenly intimacy. Early in the morning, anyway. But I decided that something had to be done. At breakfast, Susan shocked me to the core when she seemed to read my mind. Don't you think you should invite me to live with you, Connor? What is it? She asked, uttering the longest sentence not related to her work that she had ever uttered. In front of me. You're married, I said. You have to get me out of this, she replied quickly, and then kissed me and stormed out the door. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I spent all my time when I wasn't working thinking about Susan. I tried to call her on her cell phone, but the phone was switched to an answering machine. And she did not call back. On Thursday evening, 3 men and 1 woman in suits unexpectedly visited me. One of them, Arnold, introduced himself as Susan's boss, another, Patrick, as an employee of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Rockville, Maryland, the third agent, Stoll, as an FBI agent, and the woman, Astrid, as a family lawyer. We've come to talk about Susan Baring, Arnold said. Of course, I replied, leading them into my living room and offering them drinks, which they all declined. Let me get right to the point, Arnold said. As you probably know, Susan is a genius, and she is very important for our project to create a nuclear reactor that will avoid most of the problems of the current BWR and NAT. I was proud that I really knew what BWR and PWR reactors were from conversations with Susan. Yes, I know. I smiled. We need you to save Susan. She's in Mercy Hospital now. Her husband beat her up. He continued. But what? I exclaimed. Obviously, that was the reason I couldn't get through to her. Since she is a top-level federal employee, we have arrested him and he will not be released. On bail. Agent stole at it. Susan instructed me to file for divorce, which I'm going to do tomorrow, Astrid added. I've already prepared the papers. What's that got to do with me? I asked. Susan would like to stay with you while she recovers. My company will pay for help during the day if you take responsibility at night. She's not helpless. She's just broken, Arnold continued. But she trusts almost no one. Except you. Then Arnold shook me to the core by saying, I'm afraid my company is largely to blame for Susan's predicament. Before joining us, Susan did not have any contact because she was very quiet and shy, and throughout her studies, she was always the youngest student in her class. She began to show signs of depression, and she is so valuable to us that we arranged for Tom Baring to take care of her. Obviously, the people who vouched for Tom. I don't know him very well myself. I either didn't really know him or didn't take Susan's interest to heart. Arnold's eyes filled with tears, and Patrick patted him on the back before continuing. Obviously, Susan only agreed to marry Tom because he was the first one to show real interest in her, and she was single. As you can see, she didn't work out with Tom, but every time she talks about you, she lights up like a Christmas tree. She says that her attitude towards intimacy with you is infinitely different from what Tiff. It was with Tom, the only one with whom she had any intimacy at all. And if you have any feelings for her, we ask you to take her to your place to see if she will get a long-term agreement with you. She says that in less than a year of meeting you, she has had more intimacy than in all 3+ years of her marriage to Tom. I admit I was shocked. Considering the enthusiasm and joy with which Susan made love, I decided that she was experienced. Now they tell me that before we got together, she wasn't like that, and that she has real feelings for me. While I was still trying to make sense of what Arnold had said, Patrick began to tell me how valuable Susan was to the nuclear community, but I politely interrupted him. I don't need to be persuaded, Patrick. Before you arrived, I was trying to make some kind of decision about Susan. Break up with her because she's married, or try to convince her to leave that asshole. Tom, current circumstances are very close to forcing me to devote myself to her. I'll tell you what, I'm on my way to the hospital right now, and after talking to her, I'll call you, Arnold, to inform you of my decision. Everyone around smiled. Do you mind if we look around your house to see where we can put a hospital bed for Susan, and what conditions should be provided for nurses? Astrid asked. I don't mind. Come on, I smiled, taking the car keys off the rack in the kitchen where I keep them. Just make sure the front door is locked before you leave. I shook hands with all 4 of them, then got in the car and drove to Mercy Hospital. There was a policeman guarding Susan's private room, but he quickly found out that I had permission to meet her, and I walked past him without any problems. I was shocked by her condition. She had 2 bruises under her eyes, other marks on her face and neck. One leg was on the hood, and one arm was in a cast. Her eyes were closed, but they immediately opened when I lightly stroked her cheek. Despite the fact that it seemed to me that it hurt her to do this, she smiled when she howled. Do you like me just for intimacy, Connor? What is it? She asked as her smile turned to concern. No, although being close to you is the best thing in my life, I like being around you. Susan, maybe I'm even in love with you. And I'm in love with you, Connor. You treat me much better than any man, including my male relatives. Besides, before I met you, I had never been very sensual. Now I think about intimacy with you at least every hour of the day. Will you let me stay with you for a while? If in a couple of months you don't want me around anymore, I'll leave without any problems." "That'll be great," I grinned and kissed her gently on the lips. Her smile lit up the room. Then we continued the hour-long conversation about our goals in life. Things on children, origins, and much more. Practically silent, Susan is no longer silent. Finally, the nurse kicked me out, saying that Susan needed to sleep. After my first visit to the hospital, events developed quickly. 3 days later, Susan was discharged into my custody. She signed a document prepared by Astrid, according to which I became practically her guardian. I don't remember the legal terminology until she got better and had access to her finances if I needed them, which did not happen. 3 weeks after moving in with me, Susan became completely independent. We got rid of the hospital bed, broke up with the daycare givers, she returned to work part-time, and we enjoyed almost constant bodily contact when we were together. One Saturday afternoon, 5 months after Susan had returned to normal life, well, not to 2A, the old one, when she hardly spoke, but to the post-hospital when she liked talking. To me, she plopped down on my lap and said, "Connor, we need to talk." And not in a bad way when I tell you that I'm an infomaniac, but in a good way. "Bad Connor," she said, slapping me lightly on the shoulder. "Bad boy. Okay, now listen here. My divorce is going to take place next week, and I want children from you. What are you going to do about it?" I said, stroking my chin. "Will I be able to satisfy you with the same frequency if we get married?" "More often, because I won't hold back anymore," she chuckled. "Holy shit, are you saying that you were holding back?" I pretended Daisy again. "I'm not sure I can take it anymore." "You'll learn," she grinned. "Okay, will I still be able to satisfy you when you're pregnant?" "Maybe even more often. I have a feeling that, unlike many pregnant women, my libido is likely to increase." She chuckled again. "In other words, are you planning on satisfying me to death?" I chuckled. "Not to death, but only to constant euphoria." "Okay," I said after a long pause. "Let's get married. So, can I throw away my birth control pills?" On our first anniversary, I grinned. That's what we did. We got married. On our 2-year anniversary, our first child was born. The second was born closer to the 4th anniversary, the third and last just before the 6th anniversary. After that, Susan's tubes were bandaged. I'm not getting any younger, and her constant demands during pregnancies exhausted me, but in a completely joyful way. Around this time, we got 2 dogs, and Susan received a $400,000 bonus when she completed the development of an improved nuclear reactor, and the demonstration reactor worked even better than everyone else predicted, though not Susan. With 3 children, 2 dogs, a husband who tries to satisfy her at every opportunity, and an ongoing part-time job as a nuclear engineer. Susan is no longer silent. Now she's a chatterbox. Be careful on the road. See you soon.